Good morning, everyone. My name is Lizzy Noone. I'm an education officer with Worldwide's Global Schools. And in fact, this is a slightly different knowledge share in we're really taking advantage of the amazing community of practice that we have in IDEA. And I suppose taking the chance to consult you guys. And so you're like the experts today on a set of guiding principles that we have for working with secondary schools. So we work directly with secondary schools in Ireland, mainly with teachers directly to build their capacity to have a whole school approach to global citizenship education. We've had these guiding principles for a while now, but we, I guess, where we're finding challenges is the utilization of them of schools. So we're really trying to make them as simple as possible. And we'd love your help to make that really, really easy to be able to communicate that, but also to be able to recommend and point teachers in the right direction of resources that will really build their own capacity to use the guiding principles when they're doing their global citizenship education programs. So today we're going to do a short presentation and then we're going to go into breakout rooms under each principle and really, I suppose, to discuss them and to brainstorm of them, but particularly, I think, what your organization might be able to resource as well. We're not going to have a particular resource over that because there's so many resources that are excellent already out there, but it's to pinpoint what activities would be most useful in order to vis-a-vis the guiding principles themselves. So I'm joined today by my colleagues. So I have Debbie Thomas, Laura Power, Sive Bresnock, and our program director, Katie Chappell. And we are going to, if it's okay, we're going to attend the breakout rooms as well. Just to really kind of record that as well. And we're delighted to be able to share that further. And maybe there's some next steps after this as well. And maybe you will find the guiding principles useful to you. Just to mention, I know we work with the formal sector and we work specifically with secondary schools, but I think if we're thinking about global citizenship education, whoever we're working with, whether it's adult and community, or like in the non-formal sector or whatever sector we're working in, I think these are principles that that lend themselves to all of the global citizenship education that we're doing, brilliant global citizenship education that we're doing here in Ireland. So I'm just going to share screen. There's a couple of slides, we've a couple of examples of, we're going to explain why maybe we have got to this point where we're really like trying to push the guiding principles and really emphasize them within our work and within our work with teachers. So there's 5 guiding principles, and if you see just to the left of your screen, they're kind of underpinned by I suppose one thing that's really, really important in any kind of global citizenship education is scaffolding with teaching and learning. So it's, I suppose, to say that events and activities in global citizenship education should always be supported and not in isolation of the event itself. So the first one is unlearning and reconstructing. And what we mean by this, and many of us would have known, like Vanessa Andrade and her work from, I think now almost 20 years ago, Learn to Unlearn was one of the first kind of resources that came out of that we really need to unlearn some of the dominant narratives that we hear within the world, and explore different perspectives and challenge mainstream views and media, and also to recognize and counter stereotypes and seek underrepresented voices. So that's what that's about. But also on the reconstructing side, it is about looking at like amazing kind of new types of thinking around, say, the well-being economy, the donut economic, degrowth, and all of these kind of maybe reconstructing, you know, our view of the world, and I suppose looking towards kind of hope for the future, that it is doable, that our man-made designs that we've created and systems can also be reconstructed into something new. Finding root causes. So that is about us asking why, and not only focusing on the consequences and of, global injustice and inequality, but really, really kind of getting to the root of that. So that's a really obvious one for all of us here as global citizenship educators. Prioritizing human rights. So within, amazingly, which is brilliant, over the last, many years, we've had much more awareness around climate change and the environment, for instance. But we need to really, really consider where is human rights within that as well, and not to, I suppose, forget that maybe some of the solutions that we have to climate change and to, I suppose, protecting our planet needs to also include the human beings. So, and ensuring that human beings aren't harmed in that process. Obviously making local to global links, but what does that really mean? And I suppose it would be more like making local and global links, so vice versa. And making sure that, I suppose, the global citizenship education that happens is not staying at the local level, which is really, really important. And it's still an amazing starting point, but how we can really, really kind of make that relevant to like how we live and our larger kind of systems and structures. Acting in solidarity. So I suppose our really there in February, we had a teacher conference, and it was based on solidarity. And I guess this is about standing with people instead of I suppose, taking a charity approach. And this is something that we're really working with teachers to be able to, I suppose, bring to the fore. So standing and working with people affected by global injustices on an equal footing. And it also means like that we have a common goal as well to challenge some of the systems that keep inequality in place. I don't think I need to explain too much to you, but I do want to explain, I suppose, where I suppose why we are doing this as well. So with these guiding principles, in order to really, really help teachers, we've a set of inquiry questions based on the Digging Deeper model by Karen Pashby. So we've kind of matched some of them up, and you might want to discuss those in the breakout rooms later. So say on a good inquiry question, maybe on learning and reconstructing, would be which ideas are mainstream about this particular issue, what systems and structures for finding root causes allow this to continue to be an issue. Prioritizing human rights, who or what group would you like to hear more from? Making local and global links, in what way does this issue link with our everyday lives in Ireland and vice versa? And what can be done to ensure that those who are experiencing the issue have more of a voice and power under the Acting for Solidarity. All of our schools, and I'm sure all of the people that you are working with, are doing absolutely amazing work, and there's absolutely no doubt about that. And there's always a starting point that people take when they're going on their journey for global citizenship education. But as our job is really, and our passion is to really get people to the place where they're really, really critically thinking and questioning the world so that they can take meaningful action. It's important for us to kind of continue that work and to help schools get that depth and give their students the skills to be able to navigate the world in a very hopeful way, but also in a way that what they're doing is really, really meaningful and can really achieve the changes that they want to see in the world. So that's just a disclaimer for, just in case. So our why. I'm just going to give a couple of examples, I guess, on what we're kind of seeing within schools. First of all, there's a little scaffolding sometimes around the activities that they run. So like running kind of events in isolation without really backing it up with teaching and learning can often lead to kind of unnecessary stereotypes, for example, or it can lead to, we came up with thank you to my colleague, Sive came up with a great word it's like a cul-de-sac, possibly, because then a cul-de-sac maybe to where you want to go with your learning or where you want to go with changing the world. So I'll just give you a couple of examples from schools maybe where they're coming to that cul-de-sac because maybe they're not adhering to this principle. So if you're not doing the unlearning and reconstructing, and maybe kind of, you know, your approach is that aid is the solution, say, to poverty, but there's nothing wrong with aid, but it's not put in context properly in order to be able to kind of figure out what's going on in the world, or maybe kind of the larger systems maybe that are keeping poverty in place. Finding root causes, focusing on the consequences. I put child labour there, and I was a child labour, stop child labour advocate for many years as a campaign, but it's not asking why that's happening. So rather, you know, focusing on this is a terrible problem. Isn't it awful that they do that? You know, and not really going any further into kind of economic systems or like extraction and exploitation of labor. For instance, prioritizing human rights. So for this one, I guess it's kind of looking at maybe kind of that sense of kind of conserving nature, without considering maybe that conserving nature may mean that people are driven off their land, or taken off their land, or displaced because, you know, in the name of nature conservation, say, or carbon offsetting. So that's just an example of maybe where human rights might be neglected when, you know, good intentionally looking after the planet, but maybe kind of forgetting the human side to it. Making local to global links, beautiful wildflower gardens that are happening in school, and it's really, really good looking at biodiversity. But if we're sticking at that point, we're not really interrogating why that's important, and why it's important for us as global citizens to be able to influence the world. Acting in solidarity. So we just put kind of Christmas box peels, and there's, you know, nothing wrong with them, but more often than not, we find that schools or students wouldn't know why they're maybe putting their Christmas boxes together, or where the boxes are going, or why the boxes are going, or kind of little interrogation maybe of what's happening. And I guess the reason why we call it a cul-de-sac is that, I suppose, our if we think back to kind of the Live Aid legacy type of research, that our interaction with the world stops with that kind of contract of the dominant giver and the grateful receiver. So that's what I suppose, that's giving you an idea why. But we have gazillions of schools who are doing really, really like deep work. So we'll just give you a quick intro into that. So I'm going to take this opportunity now to switch over to my colleague Laura Power, who's going to talk about one of the schools we work with in Limerick, and how they are really, like, I suppose, taking this principle of unlearning and reconstructing within their school.
Thanks, Lizzy. So Villiers this year, they made a whole school commitment to having built-in space for reflection, pre and post exploring a GCE event or theme. So that's where a lot of their unlearning and reconstructing was able to happen. And the feedback from the school that it was a really, really successful way of doing it. So for example, they had a module on travel history and culture that was introduced within the global context of prejudice and minority groups. And that space for reflection pre and post that module provided that unlearning and reconstructing time. So they said that in their feedback that it created a genuine push for a change in behavior, whereas beforehand, if they hadn't have done that, they always found that there was an element of distance from the students on a topic they were learning about, and perhaps an element of disengagement as well. So that whole school commitment to providing space pre and post an event or a theme was really key. The teacher, our lead teacher, is a history teacher, so she also used that opportunity for that pre and post space learning to introduce herstory, for example, into the history classroom. So if the topic they were talking about didn't necessarily look at the role of women at the time, she used that space to introduce that. And again, she found that really, really key to students' learning. and how they were able to see that event then through various different perspectives before and afterwards. And through literature as well, they have a book club that teachers and students can join. And again, before and after the book, they provide that space for unlearning and reconstructing around a GCE theme.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Lizzie.
So very, very quickly. So another school we work with, Balmain Educate. By the way, most of these schools are special passport holders. So they're kind of like our top, I guess, like award for a whole school approach to global citizenship education. So this, we're actually in the process of revising our global passport, and they will be based like upon these guiding principles now, because we found that was something maybe amiss from the original iteration of the global passport. So just very, very quickly, and I just put a quick quote up there, and it actually, it's not only about finding root causes, I also think this is quite good on the local to global front as well. It was about discussing kind of climate change impacts in different places around the world and how interconnected it is with global racism and colonialism. And I thought that was a really, really interesting way to look at it, and that level of critical thinking around climate change and relating it then back to racism and colonialism was fantastic. But also, I suppose, in their acting in solidarity with that, bringing their voices to our politicians as well. But they're really kind of, you know, they dig deep into why that's happening. And another case, like part of their case study would be like doing something local, like repairing benches as well. But as part of this process, they would have looked at the extraction and exploitation that takes place as regards, like, you know, the way the materials that we use today. So, and they would have looked at, like, say, alternative energies and where they, you know, where your lithium now is coming from, where your copper is coming from. So that level of interrogation we'd be advocating for within schools. Also a really quick, I suppose, way in like linking local to global is the garden in North Wicklow, Educate Together, and how they look at, say, something like monoculture. So they grow potatoes, but relating it to, like, you know, how industrial agriculture is harming our world as well, and harming the environment, and harming people, and creating climate migrants, etc. So I suppose it's not necessarily the activity itself, but it is also, again, it's back to that kind of scaffolding and how well it's scaffolded. So back to Laura for 1 second. I'm conscious of time now.
No
But,
worries. Thanks, Lizzie.
I think these are important, maybe just to show you where people are going right, in, you know, I don't mean going right, but they're, you know, that they are doing some really, really good work.
Yeah, so with GERT Community School in Galway, they do a lot of great work focusing on nature. And we have a really, really passionate global schools lead teacher who knows that for any of that work to be considered GCE, that it needs to have that human rights link. So an example of what happened this year was that there was a garden made in GERT, and it's now a peace garden. And anything in relation to that garden needs to have a human rights link. So there's learning linked to the garden. So this year, for example, they planted primroses for Palestine, and that resulted in a whole school approach of learning and an advocacy campaign around human rights regarding what's happening in Palestine, particularly around the rights of a child. So that's just one example.
I'm going to pass you to Debbie now. Sorry about this, but I think these are really, really important to get across. So Debbie.
Thank you. Thanks, Lizzie. Yeah, so another example of local to global was at West Wicklow Youth Reach this year. So they have done several things. First of all, they've had a virtual exhibition called Single Use Earth, where the learners have designed their own posters with captions, just looking at the impact of climate change. So, and also relating their own sort of local situation. And they've done this by developing an app called SDG Air to go with the exhibition. And this gives facts and quizzes and local surveys and angles on climate change and the SDGs as well, particularly on each of the SDGs, and looks at Ireland's progress on the goals as well. So that's a very clear sort of local to global link. And they've also produced a sustainable cookbook called Eco Eats, which is, again, relating the local to global, looking at food security around the world, perhaps looking at it from global to local, sort of starting with the big picture. So starting with food security around the world, looking at carbon footprint, sustainable agriculture, and then localizing it to produce sustainable recipes and grow their own food in the centre's garden, which they use to feed learners and staff. So that's a beautiful balance between the local and the global, and making very strong links that are relevant to the learners, but also give the bigger picture from a global perspective. And then an example of solidarity was shown by NACE CBS, where students throughout last year have been studying anti-racism. And they've been looking at it across the curriculum. So, for example, in history, they've been looking at the origins of racism, colonialism. In science, they looked at the biological myth of race. In maths, they've analysed statistics, both globally and looking at the Irish context as well, particularly from the Irish Network Against Racism. And they also have made street signs to put up in their corridors with fact sheets about different anti-racism activists, from Rosa Parks to Nelson Mandela, just sort of looking at their lives and the work they have done to combat racism. And finally, in an act of great solidarity, students have written a petition which they're going to present to local TD, calling for improvements in the direct provision system. So a lot of solidarity shown by the school.
Great. Maybe some questions to think about, which is number one, under unlearning. What do you think we need to unlearn for a more just, sustainable world? So number two, under finding the root causes. Why is it important for us to get to the root causes of inequality and non-sustainability? And what GCE themes often neglect human rights under our prioritising human rights, and what barriers are there to connecting local and global issues? And how do we explain simply the difference between solidarity and charity? So the next steps for WorldWise would be not necessarily to, I suppose, just to connect these guiding principles with really good activities. So for instance, we have that brilliant ranking exercise that we have in How the World Works for finding root causes. So we have the tools there. It's just, I suppose, connecting each one of those, relating our inquiry questions. So having a good set of inquiry questions for teachers to be able to delve deeper into these guiding principles. We're in the process of making kind of illustrations for each of the guiding principles. And we have, I think, a lot of good practice examples, but just to make those stronger. And just to mention, on our website, we have a great space for case studies. And it's really, please do use them if you're working with anybody, but they give you kind of great, I suppose, on the ground experience of what's happening. And then we'll have a poster for schools, and our website be updated. And as I mentioned, the global passport will be based on our guiding principles.